Whether it's backstage politics or questionable creative decisions, there's something morbidly fascinating about Broadway flops. More often than not, the bigger the train wreck, the harder it is to look away. Nearly 10 years since it took Broadway by storm, no fiasco has yet to eclipse Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark. With a budget of more than $75 million, the show was the most expensive flop in Broadway history. From horrible reviews to shocking injuries, the odyssey of this doomed production continues to capture the imagination because of how much we still don't know. But thanks to books like Glenn Berger's Song of the Spider-Man, we can definitely learn a little bit more about this ridiculous story. I'm Brendan with Wait in the Wings, and these are 10 fascinating tales from Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark. Number 1. Imagination Dragons. Producer Tony Adams faced a huge uphill battle when he won the rights to Spider-Man in the early 2000s. His new production company had yet to stage a single Broadway show, and suddenly he was entrusted with one of the biggest superheroes on the planet. A band from Las Vegas was commissioned to write a couple conceptual demo tracks. The tracks the band wrote were good. Really good. The songs were so good, in fact, that it was decided they'd be placed on their own album, with any references to Spider-Man being cut out. The band's name was Imagine Dragons, and sadly, we'd never hear from the young upstarts ever again. Number 2. A Freak Like Me. Turn Off the Dark went through extensive rewrites after a backstage coup led to director Julie Taymor being fired. Don't worry, we're going to talk about that in a second. Philip William McKinley and Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa stepped in to try to add their own twist on the rewrites. As Glenn Berger put it, they took the characters down the road to Vanillaville. This was especially true for the Green Goblin, who was becoming less of a real dangerous threat and more of a cheesy jester. No moment exemplified this better than the song A Freak Like Me Needs Company, which found the Green Goblin acting as a ringleader to a chaotic circus of calamity. The song effectively robbed the Green Goblin of any remaining malice. Needing to find a way to make the character threatening again, actor Patrick Page made a suggestion that during a scene where the Green Goblin breaks into the Daily Bugle, he should just kill one of the old guys. But not just kill him, strangle the life out of him. While it definitely could have demonstrated the viciousness of the character, they couldn't find a way to get the dead reporter off the stage. They tried having Goblin pick up the body and place it on J. Jonah Jameson's desk, which would then be wheeled off stage, but when Page couldn't get the reporter on top of the desk, without it looking like the Green Goblin was doing some pretty suggestive and volatile stuff to a dead body, the team quickly dropped the idea. Peachy. Number 3. Turn off the what? What confuses you most about the Spider-Man musical? Is it the story? The villains? The fact that this thing even exists at all? It's safe to say that one of the most confusing aspects of the show is the musical's name itself. From newspaper articles to the playbills to the marquee on the front of the theater, no one could escape the title Turn Off the Dark. But what did it even mean? Would Spider-Man have to fight a citywide blackout? Would he fight through a dark neon horrorscape? Was it just a more complicated way of saying turn on the lights? The title was decided upon during a wild writing session between director Julie Taymor, writer Glenn Berger, and composers Bono and The Edge, in which Bono did a random impression of Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, but that's not important to the story. As the team took a break from watching scenes from The Matrix while Radiohead was playing over top, they started talking about the show's narrative. Just then, Bono and The Edge brought up something one of their friends' children would say before going to bed. She'd look at her mom and ask her to turn off the dark. It only took a 1-minute discussion before they all agreed that that would be the show's new title. So if you're ever frustrated that you don't know the deeper meaning behind why the show's called Turn Off the Dark, you can rest easy knowing that really nobody else does either. Number 4. I'm too sexy for my brands. Before coming on to Spider-Man: Turn Off the Dark, Julie Taymor didn't know that much about comic books or superheroes. But what she did know was Greek mythology. So when she opened up the first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man and found this page with Norman Osborn retelling the myth of Arachne, it was basically open season for the director. Tamor would take the tortured seamstress and turn her story into a more mature Princess and the Frog tale. A much more mature Princess and the Frog tale. Arachne's libido was dialed up to 11, with one of the first drafts by playwright Neil Jordan finding Norman Osborn ogling her foot before she says, "There's more where that came from," leading to 6 more of her legs popping out. Though Jordan would ultimately be fired, the sexy energy of Arachne persisted, with rumors swirling around that the movie Spider-Man 3 was going to see Peter Parker embrace his darker side. The musical's writers were confident Sony and Marvel would go for the more mature storyline. Then, the writers actually watched Spider-Man 3 and realized they were so wrong. Sony Pictures co-chairman Amy Pascal voiced her concerns privately with Tamor, and following the first reading in 2007, Marvel's main note was, "The level of sexuality and extreme adult themes are inappropriate for both the character and the musical." Sadly, the impassioned script would be splashed with a cold handful of water, thus leaving us to wonder what they could have done with the Green Goblin's tongue had they gotten away with it. Number 5, The Amazing Running Man. One of the most talked about moments from Julie Taymor's musical adaptation for The Lion King was the Circle of Life opening. It was spectacular, moving, and creatively breathtaking in a way that sucked audiences in right from the get-go. Hoping lightning would strike twice, Julie Taymor's original vision for Turn Off the Dark's opening included a dramatic retelling for the myth of Arachne, seeing the seamstress defy the gods and be punished for her hubris. But Marvel's chief creative officer and passionate Venom enthusiast, Avi Arad, was already against the idea of creating a new original villain for the musical, meaning he was quick to reject this pitch right from the get-go. If it was a Spider-Man musical, Spidey needed to be front and center when the curtain went up. The show's opener changed to mirror a dramatic moment near the first act, where Spider-Man jumps off the Brooklyn Bridge to save a dangling Mary Jane Watson. While cool in theory, narratively at this point, Spider-Man has lost his powers. So when the show starts, he can't do any of the cool things people expect. Instead of a big dramatic swing in or a powerful spider jump, the lights came up and all Spider-Man could do was run, which is a pretty far cry from Circle of Life. Number 6, ain't that a kick in the head? The first preview night for Turn Off the Dark was a disaster for a bunch of reasons. But for Arachne actress Natalie Mendoza, it almost took her out of the production permanently. Mendoza was practically unable to move once she put on her spider legs and became Arachne. So, as she was waiting in the pit to make her final entrance, Mendoza was suddenly whacked by cold metal as a heavy carabiner came down and crashed onto her head. Dazed, the actress still went on for the show. Ultimately, Mendoza was left with a concussion and doctor's orders not to perform until further notice. The same day she got this recommendation from the doctor, America Olivo was told she'd be going on for Mendoza. With only 8 hours to prepare and still being behind on some vocal and aerial training for the role, Olivo officially made her Broadway debut and triumphantly carried the role for another few weeks before Mendoza finally came back in December. But then, number 7, The Boy Falls from the Sky. Having just come back from her concussion, it's safe to assume Natalie Mendoza wanted her first night back to be uneventful. Sadly, she wouldn't get her wish. Mendoza returned to the pit, when out of nowhere, a body came crashing down on the concrete right in front of her. It was stuntman Chris Tierney, who had just fallen from 30 feet up. At this moment in the show, Spider-Man was meant to jump off the bridge, and then a safety cable, which was attached to the actor, and an anchor at the back of the stage would make it look like he was floating in midair. On this night, however, a stagehand forgot to attach the harness to the stage anchor, leaving Chris Tierney with no other choice but to plummet off the bridge. Midair, Tierney made a split-second pivot to his body so he would avoid landing on his head, hitting the cement on his back. Shockingly, Tierney survived and returned to the show 4 months later. Meanwhile, I stubbed my toe on a coffee table and I have to take the rest of the day off. Number 8. Safety first. There wasn't a more dangerous place to be in 2010 and 2011 than backstage at Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. The show was quickly becoming synonymous with injuries by both the press and the public. And yet, despite the irony of being one of the most dangerous shows Broadway had ever seen, that didn't stop the cast from delivering a press conference on Halloween safety in 2012. The fever dream of an event saw Green Goblin and Spidey address reporters on the importance of not eating unwrapped treats, talking to strangers, or wearing unsafe costumes, while literally being flanked by Swiss Miss, a walking pocket knife whose costume could absolutely impale someone if she turned the wrong way. Lovely. Number 9, behind the ears. It was decided early on that one of the biggest draws for Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark would be the actors actually fighting above the crowd's heads. Given how technologically complicated this would be to pull off, it didn't take long for the already astronomical budget of $30 million to skyrocket to over $60 million. Sensing the negative effects that a canceled production could have on the Spider-Man brand, Marvel was prepared to negotiate helping Garfinkel financially. But when they heard about how much he needed, Marvel CEO Ike Perlmutter scoffed and quickly closed his checkbook. The next week, Marvel was sold to Disney for $4 billion. Even though the company never got directly involved financially, Disney CEO Bob Iger did have a say in many of the production's big decisions, namely, having the final say in implementing number 10, Plan X. The Turn Off the Dark writing team was in a pretty odd predicament when it came to writing the show. Not only were they trying to hit the studio's desire of including key moments from the films and comics, but they were also trying to bring to life Julie Taymor's Greek myth involving Spider-Man and Arachne. Believing the latter storyline was more important, Act 1 would end with a huge flying fight between Green Goblin and Spider-Man, in which the Green Goblin dies by getting a piano smashed on his head? I don't know. Thus leaving Act 2 to end with Arachne and Peter fighting on an impressive multi-million-dollar web net draped over the crowds. Everything after Goblin's death in Act 1 was super confusing. The best fix from a narrative, financial, and technical standpoint was to move the Green Goblin fight from the end of Act 1 to the end of the show. A large majority of the crew agreed, but by now, Taymor was far too invested in the Arachne story to ever go for it. Knowing this, producers Michael Cole and Jeremiah Harris, along with Bono, The Edge, Disney, and Marvel, decided to move forward on rewrites without Taymor's knowledge. Even though Plan X was Glenn Berger's idea, he was still extremely loyal to Taymor. Sensing that she'd be fired if the plan was put in motion, Berger made a rash decision. He sent Taymor an email, revealing every detail about the secret plan in hopes that she'd agree with the changes. But somehow, the email got buried in her inbox, and she wouldn't read it until 2 weeks later. But by then, it was too late. Disney and Marvel gave the go-ahead on Plan X, leaving Julie Taymor to be fired, literally the next day. And that's our list. Do you want to dive deeper into the fiasco rabbit hole? Then click on this video to learn about Patti LuPone, Andrew Lloyd Webber, and the feud involving Sunset Boulevard.